Simon's quest is dumb, and it's stupid, and it's stupid, and it's dumb.
Each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. George Orwell. Folks, I am an optimist. I know it's hard to believe considering I'm so negative, but the only reason I do this is because I believe humanity is capable of so much more. It was commonly said about President Wilson that he loved humanity but hated humans. And to be honest, that phrase describes me as well. However, one message is constant. People are getting dumber. They said it last year. They said it the year before that. They said it back in 2012. And they will almost certainly be saying the same thing again in the near future. But here's my first question. Compared to what? Humans have existed for 200,000 years. If you follow this idea that we're getting dumber back far enough, you believe the cavemen were all Albert Einstein levels of intelligent. Is it just compared to our parents and grandparents? Well, then, I must say, I find it odd we were getting more intelligent for 199,960 years, but these past 40 years or so have caused us to lose our edge. The last documented brain expansion of human beings occurred 5,800 years ago. Mind you, it's possible that, like with other forms of evolution, brain expansion has occurred since, but has been too small to be properly noticed by any scientific tools we currently have.
This is from my latest book, which is being published, I think, in 3 days' time, The Magic of Reality. And what we're looking at here is a thought experiment in which the reader is invited to take a photograph of herself, an ordinary picture postcard, place it on a table, then take a photograph of her father, father's father, father's father's father, you can do it mother, whichever you like, and then go on and go on and go on, stacking these photographs into an ever higher pile. And I arbitrarily decided that the pile should stop after 185 million generations. So we've got 185 picture postcards, photographs of your ancestors stacked on top of each other. That's about 40, I think I worked out, New York skyscrapers. No, I think it's even more than that. Then I imagine tilting it on its side. And so what you're seeing there is the stack of pictures tilted on its side. And you wander along this great long bookshelf full of pictures, every now and again pulling one off. And the ones you see there are an archaic Homo sapiens and then a Homo erectus, which would have been our ancestor about 1.5 million years ago. What's interesting is that I asked the question, who was the first person? That's the title of the chapter. And I begin with a slightly paradoxical answer, that there never was a first person. Because every animal, every person ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. You can take that back as far as you like, and I take it back to 185 million generations ago. You turn over the page and you reveal that your 185 million great-grandfather was a fish.
Do we have a picture of a fish here?
It might even be there. And at first sight, it sounds paradoxical to say that your 185 million great-grandfather was a fish, but on the other hand, every single generation on the way back there belonged to there it is, yes, belonged to the same species as its parents and as its children. The point is, of course, that the whole process is incredibly gradual, incredibly slow. It takes millions of years. We're familiar with this kind of gradual, imperceptible change because all of us started off as a baby and became a toddler and became a child and became a teenager and became an adult. And there never was a moment when you could say, yesterday I was a toddler and now I'm a child, or yesterday I was a baby and now I'm a toddler. It doesn't happen that way. It's the same as looking at the hour hand of your watch. You can't see it move. But if you wait for an hour and look at it again, you find that it has moved. And that's like evolution. So It's a kind of fortunate accident that all the intermediates are extinct, which is why we can divide the living kingdoms into separate species which can't interbreed with each other. But if all the ancestors were still alive, then there would be a complete continuum between every creature and every other creature, going back to the common ancestor and then forward again. And as you go back, every single generation, there never was a Homo erectus parent who gave birth to a Homo sapiens baby. Always, they would have been classified, if a taxonomist had been around at the time, as belonging to the same species.
But hey, claims that sound absurd can be true. In fact, writing off claims as wrong just because they sound absurd is a logical fallacy. So let's look at the arguments that prove people are getting dumber and see just how accurate they are. First off, one of the most cited things mentioned in every one of these articles is a drop in IQ.
Now, for those of you who don't know, IQ stands for Idiot Quiz. It measures your level of stupidity.
Actually, I think IQ stands for Intelligence Quotient. And it's supposed to test how smart you are.
That doesn't sound right. Anyway, good luck. I want you all to do really well. Or really poorly, depending on which of us is right about what IQ stands for.
For the sake of argument, we'll ignore all the controversy around IQ, including how it was never meant to be used how it is currently used today.
The first IQ test was never intended to measure intelligence. In fact, it was invented in 1904 as a way to assess which French kids were doing well in kindergarten.
Wine is to lunch as cigarette is...
To recess?
Excellent! You are now ready for the French first grade.
Huh, that's awfully specific.
Well, the inventor of the test, Alfred Binet, said that was the point.
My test is for children. It is not meant to apply to everyone.
Which, oddly, by the way, always seem to be forgotten by these articles.
Really makes you think.
And instead take note of a few other details that are commonly left out. For example, one common argument for why we're getting dumber is that the idiots with bad genetics are just having all the children. However, IQ is also lowering within families just as much as it's lowering society-wide.
IQ is not just dropping across all of society uniformly, or on average, it's dropping specifically within individual families. So over the course of generations within the same family, IQ is dropping. That takes out the possibility that it's just stupid people having more kids, and it takes out the possibility that you can blame immigrants from poor countries for the average intelligence going down.
So this argument is utterly nonsensical. It should be noted that many of these studies are not looking at long-term trends, but simply going year by year. From 1942 to 2008, it was found that the IQs of British children had gone up by 14 points. And similar results can be found throughout various countries. For that matter, do you guys ever wonder why the average IQ is set at 100? This is because the average number of correct responses given during a sample done for each new IQ test is set to 100. And by the way, there's no standardization process for IQ tests. Yeah, so that's kind of also an issue that, again, is just never mentioned. IQs going down doesn't mean that people are getting dumber. It means the bell curve of intelligence is shrinking. This could mean people are getting dumber or smarter depending on which way the last samples went.
And we need to briefly discuss the Flynn effect here. So when IQ tests are constructed, they're standardized using a sample of test takers. Now what that means in practice is the testers will test some people, work out the average score, and set that to correspond to 100. This is why we recognize an IQ of 100 as the average. Addressing the Flynn effect, Herrnstein and Murray write the following. There is a further question to answer. Does a 15-point IQ difference between grandparents and their grandchildren mean that the grandchildren are 15 points smarter? Some experts do not believe that the rise is wholly, perhaps not even partly, a rise in intelligence, but in the narrower skills involved in intelligence test-taking per se.
I should note the basics of what I just said can also never be agreed upon. Depending on your source, a number of things I just said are correct, have never been tested, or are long debunked. You know, real science doesn't seem to have this issue.
Really makes you think.
In fact, while researching this exact script I'm reading to you now, I found an article from the BBC stating that average IQ has gone up, but people are still getting dumber.
Waggity smaggity doo.
For that matter, evolution states that people will gain skills that help them better adapt to their environment. For centuries, memorization was an important part of doing anything. Information was hard to come by, so if you wanted to learn something, you better hope you can find a book about it at the library, or much later, maybe you'd see it on television once. Oh, and that was assuming you could read, because we have no record of any nation being majority literate until the United Kingdom and the Netherlands broke 53% in 1650. At the same time, Belgium was 25% literate, France was 29%, Germany was 31%, Ireland was 3%, Italy was 23%, Poland was also at 3%, Spain was at 5%, and Sweden was at 23%. All of them are beaten in literacy by Afghanistan in 2015, which had a literacy rate of 38%. So, another claim that people are getting dumber because they don't read books anymore is utter nonsense, because most people didn't read books throughout most of history. Mostly because throughout most of history, most people couldn't read.
I never learned to read!
However, with computers being able to handle most memorization, this means the average person can do more with said information. The phrase computer was even coined as a way to describe people who could do math problems faster than the average person. For example, once upon a time, just learning how to spell words would take up a large chunk of writing a book. Now with spell check, people have more time to just write ideas down. In his book, ADD, A Different Perspective, Tom Hartman separates hunters and farmers. For the sake of circling this back around, hunters are people who apply ideas, while farmers are focused on memorizing information. One interesting fact is that a large number of successful entrepreneurs have been diagnosed with ADHD.
A study conducted at the University of California, San Francisco surveyed 242 entrepreneurs and found that 49% of them reported having at least one mental health condition. When compared to a small sample of 93 non-entrepreneurs, they were noticeably more likely to report having some type of mental health condition. The entrepreneurs were then asked to specify on their condition. 30% reported having depression, 29% reported having ADHD, 12% reported having substance abuse, 11% were reported having bipolar disorder, and 27% reported having anxiety.
Which Hartman says is the result of genetics that would have previously made people successful hunters. In truth, we have been hunters for much longer than we have been farmers. However, it is during the time when we were farmers that we developed concepts like modern intelligence testing and education. In fact, the reason why school children have summers off in the United States, even in places like New York City, is so they can help their parents farm the land.
The reality is today, almost all the schools that kids go to are still operating on the industrial model. Why do we group kids by age in school? Why do we take the summer off?
Because that's the way it was always done.
Most of it is based on history and tradition.
Kids get the summer off because they're needed on the farm. 100 years ago, when most worked on the farm.
100 years ago, yes.
As such, our understanding of both of these issues is basically entirely based on an outlier. It's especially a shame because if our society embraced this way, we could unlock our true potential. Instead, we tell people they're stupid for having this outlook, which just creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. One study Hartman mentioned in the book involves two groups of students randomly being placed in a smart and dumb class. And the kids in the dumb class always did worse, even if they were smart beforehand. If we instead choose to put people in the dumb class for no reason, We'll create a system where people are constantly trying to live in a time that we didn't evolve to live in. Anyway, that's all for tonight. I'm Ephrom, and I'm at a different angle for some reason, and in a different shirt. Huh. Good night, everybody. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how that happens.